cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our breakout group today. Thank you for joining us. Well, this is the Learning from Codes of Conduct and Consent Committees breakout room. You will hear many bits of information today about how folks have developed codes of conduct and consent committees. So I hope that you get a lot of great information from this breakout group that will allow you to go and create your own codes of conduct or consent committees in your individual communities. I'm your speaker, Tiya Coleman. I'll be hosting today. I'm a meta-regional contact. I'm also a Las Vegas regional contact, and I've been serving as a Las Vegas regional contact since 2004. I'm also a member of the Conflict Support Meta Subcommittee. Some of our speakers that will be joining us today will be Corprew Reed, or Ranger Zeitgeist. He's a member of VEST. Also KreveTTe, Geraldine Bonnard, who is a consent officer with Nowhere, the wonderful regional event that takes place in Spain. Also Carly Nix. Carly Nix is the president of the board of the Firefly Art Collective. Our technical moderator today will be Marin Love. Our chat moderator will be Robin, a human. And note taker will be helping us today will be Debbie, or Red Vixen. Now, I had mentioned that I was a member of the Conflict Support Meta Subcommittee. Well, what's the Conflict Support Meta Subcommittee, you ask? Well, the Conflict Support Meta Subcommittee provides conflict support for the Global Burning Man Network. We assist with disputes, complaints, accusations, financial discrepancies within the regional network. Now, one of the things that we've done on the Conflict Support Meta Subcommittee was create a database of codes of conduct from different events and regional communities. Codes of Conduct database is a collection of current codes of conduct from burner events and regional communities from around the globe. The database contains 19 examples of community-created codes of conduct, and hopefully will serve as a valuable resource for organizations learning to create their own codes of conduct for themselves, but they don't know where to start. The link that's shown below can be clicked on to gain access to the database. And I'd like to thank my fellow meta-regional contact, Scotto Platsky, for collecting and curating this codes of conduct database. Now, there's one thing I'd like you to know as community leaders and regional contacts. We are not the police. We are excited, engaged regional contacts and community leaders who want to see our communities thrive. But we're not the police. So as Burning Man regional contacts and community leaders, we wear many hats, but acting as law enforcement is not one of them. So how do we create systems that are going to help our communities thrive and keep the peace? Well, that's why you're joining us today, to hear what other communities have done as far as creating codes of conduct, and also codes of conduct, as well as consent committees. First off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Corprew Reed. He also known as Ranger Zeitgeist. He is a member of VEST. Take it away, Ranger Zeitgeist.
Hey folks, how's it going? Today I'm going to be talking about the virtual event support team, which are Rangers, harm reduction volunteers, Ply Info volunteers, and Temple Guardians. And I'm specifically one of the VEST volunteers. So VEST is the virtual event support team. And it's a group of these folks who've come together to help people across the network put on virtual events like, the multiverse at Burning Man, or, virtual Del Fuego, or other events along those lines. And specifically, rangers help guard the shared values of the burner community. We help with acculturation, and we respond to the changing environment. We respond to situations that might otherwise require outside involvement. And our goal is to help with the people, not the moderation or the technology. Because when you're running a virtual event, it's helpful to have both moderators who take care of the tech and say removing people from channels to prevent to protect the event, like prevent spammers. But you also need rangers and the other parts of VEST to help with the people who are attending the event, help that go smoothly. So one way to think about it is rangers mediate conflicts between people, moderators handle inappropriate content. And, people have conflicts here, in these virtual spaces, online spaces generally. From VEST's experience during the pandemic, levels of anxiety and levels of stress are rising. They're high. Whether on purpose or not, people are being confrontational in online spaces, and that comes to events. People bring their real life issues to virtual events. They leave them in the temple. They need to talk to rangers about things that are happening at the event or outside things in the world, just like at regionals. Relationship problems come to the event with you when you attend. Bad days come to the event with you when you attend. Stressful situations come to events with you when you attend. And with, a 24-hour virtual event, it's always, just early in the morning somewhere. It's always end of the night when the bars are closing somewhere. It's every time, And so VEST, to help deal with this, recommends having a code of conduct that fits your platform. For example, in some platforms, the person who is booted can just recreate another account, jump right back in. Possibly with a different avatar, possibly not. So you have to be able to mediate that person's behavior, get them in line with your social norms. And a code of conduct is one of the things that can help people navigate these new spaces. It can also help people acculturate your new spaces, because these things being online mean that people who know nothing about your event, your community, can just wander in, fire up their goggles and go, fire up, log in from their laptop. And this can and having a code of conduct can help you be inclusive. But one part of this is, like, at the heart of this is communication, mediation, and conflict resolution. A lot of this is being present for people and listening to them with compassion and empathy. And there are tools for listening to people with compassion and empathy that rangers use, and we recommend to folks because they've worked out pretty well. And I'm going to discuss one or two of them now, assuming that a slide deck appears in about 3 seconds. All right, that looks like a slide deck to me. Does it look like a slide deck to other folks? All right, away we go. So we're here to talk about the culture of feedback, giving and receiving feedback, because it's two sides of the same coin. If we want to be the better people we want to see in the world, a good place to start is with giving and receiving feedback. So giving and receiving feedback is hard. It can be a challenge to give it and also to receive it. It can be hard to give constructive feedback in stressful situations. You need to make sure you're giving feedback that works for people and not personal attacks. And so coming from a compassionate place, having things to rely on, such as codes of conduct, being able to say, this should go to the conduct committee, move on from here, is a way of making this work better, have your feedback be listened to, because feedback is a gift if done well. When you see someone doing something outstanding, let them know about it. But likewise, we should agree to give each other feedback on our behaviors when they're less than ideal. Codes of conduct is a framework for feedback. A consent committee is a place that feedback comes from. There are tools for feedback. One of them that Rangers use is FLAME. And FLAME is an acronym that stands for finding out, listening, analyzing, mediating, and explaining. It's an effective tool for engaging in conflict resolution. It starts with finding out what's going on, and it ends with explaining the resolution you've come to together with the other people involved. It's flexible. It starts at the beginning, it ends at the end with the explanation, and it can bounce between the other steps as needed. So finding out, you start by doing nothing, observing what's going on, being aware of the scene safety, how other people are in the scene, what your mindset is and what your assumptions, be aware of the resources you have and what resources you might need to help this come to a successful conclusion. And when you listen to people, listen actively. Take notes if it's appropriate, and listen to everyone who's available. Listen to the people who are participating in this. Find the people, because getting information from more participants can help you come to greater understanding. And then once you've found out, you can analyze, you can assess the situation, you can assess your surroundings and what's going on. You can gather information, and together with other people possibly, or think about what you've heard, think about what people are saying, think about what brings this together. Because then after you've sort of thought about this and you've thought about what's going on, and listen to everyone as compassionately as you can, the next part of that is mediating. And to work together with the people who are part of this to determine and decide the resolution, being the neutral third party. This doesn't apply always to, like, say, consent committees, but do the best that you can to guide the conversation rather than direct the conversation. Find out where there's wiggle room and point it out. And we'll get back to that a little bit more later. And then once, together with the other parties, you've worked on these things and you've come together and had this conversation, make sure that you explain the outcome. Because people actually understanding the outcome that they're agreeing to is critical. If people don't understand what they're agreeing to, if mental state or language comprehension or other things like that means that they don't understand, you are not actually coming to the agreement that you thought you have, and it's going to recur faster than it might otherwise. And this might include having the conflicted parties explain back to you and also to each other what they think the agreed solution is, or to write down an agreement. So another sort of mnemonic to think of, in addition to FLAME, is safety. And this is something that can come back when you're giving someone feedback. It's a very useful tool. So yeah, when you give examples, please be specific. If you don't combine two things, give two examples instead. Make sure when you give feedback, it's actionable. Make sure it's something that they can change, that these are steps that can happen. Make sure your feedback is factual, not just your opinion, but like based on the facts. Codes of conduct are a fact. They exist in the real world. They're written down and people can make reference to them. And also think, is this feedback empathetic? Is this feedback coming from a good place? Is this outcome you're looking for positive for the person hearing this? It might not be, but is it meant to help and allow for growth or reflection? And another part of this is the feedback timely, which is the T. Is the timing appropriate to assure that the receiver is in the mental space to hear this? Are people able to give good feedback now? Do they need to, move on? Because another part of this is we participate in a culture of feedback as part of burner culture, and having consent committees and codes of conducts can be a helpful part of building a stronger community where people grow together. So now back to the part of this where you have to look at my face again. So in my region, we're lucky enough to have a consent committee. And it works really well, and the rangers work in partnership with it. So I'm going to talk as a ranger about some ways that we work together and some recommendations about having them work, because codes of conduct and consent committees are needed for things that happen inside and outside of events. But as a ranger, I'm speaking about things that happen at events. Things happen at events, and it's helpful for the event teams to have a planned way to work together with the members of the committee and the people who judge code of conduct violations to make sure that they do it. And one thing that makes sense is if you have agreements about what sort of decisions get made at an event and what sort of decisions get made after an event. So for example, separating these two things makes asking someone to leave an event a lower stakes decision. It's sad, but it's lower stakes. Removing someone from an event isn't the same as banning them from the community. Avoid making permanent decisions in the heat of the moment. That separation, whether that be with procedures or by having different people between your events team and volunteers and the consent committee, can help make that possible. And we trust the people on the consent committee to make the decisions, but we also need to enable them. You should, at an event, if you're asking someone to leave or something's happened, you should collect information from people around. Because part of safety, the acronym before, is timely. And if you have a reason or a need to consider a decision later, getting statements in the moment is helpful. This means that you might need to collect statements, collect what we call incident reports, put their descriptions of people's experience, find out who was involved to help the consent committee with its investigation later. That can help both with consent and evaluating people's actions against code of conduct. And that's what we want as part of this culture of feedback, for these decisions that people make to be constructive, accurate, and fair, even when they're very, very hard. And the other thing is, the last thing I would add is that also, as community leaders, take care of the people on these committees, because this is a hard job and we should be mindful of that and appreciate them volunteering and the work that they do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ranger Zeitgeist. That was great. If you have any questions or you're interested in how the Rangers are able to navigate pretty difficult situations, you can reach out to Zeitgeist. There is Ranger Zeitgeist. There should be a link that will be dropped in the chat on how you can contact him, and then also get more information about VEST itself. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from KreveTTe.
So we will have a journey in 10 steps. Don't worry, some slides will be a little long, but some other will be short. And the good news is that you will experience a very French accent, which is worldwide supposed to be so sexy. So the subtopic can be boring, but I will try to do that the more erotic French way possible. So the ride will begin in a discovery of consent at nowhere. Since 2015, a lot have been achieved. We'll have a little journey in that. We'll emphasize how much the consent project is a whole nowhere community and not only a central crew concern. We'll have a look on the nowhere participant code of conduct and another view on the consent committee. We will also have a little look on a scale, which is one of our very important tools. we will do a little journey about what are the various steps of a consent committee session. And according to Nowhere statistic, we will have a look at which type of session we could expect in the future. And of course, what are the consent committee session output? What do we set up? What are the results of those sessions? And we will conclude in focusing on the fact that we have lost burning mind who are really traveling to a burn event to another. And so we'll have to deal with how we deal with personal data protection. So here is the beautiful landscape of the Nowhere project. You can see on the top left that there is a code of conduct, because everything I will explain is legitimate as takes as reference the code of conduct. So if we begin by the ground, the grass, the very green grass, the very green grass has to be credited to Aletta Dune, Aletta Dictibulum on Facebook, for those who know her. Since 2015, she understood how much in our very free world, there has to be a kind of consent education, because whatever principle you define, if the very start of it is not respected, it doesn't work. So since 2015, she had made sure that there are toilet posters giving some punchline about consent. She have spread some punchline about consent badges. You can see them, a little of them there. She also, I'm sorry, I've got to move my something, yes. She also delivered some consent education to the greeters, because the greeters are very important. They welcome the participant. So from the start, they have to be very good in explaining what is consent in a burn event. And she made some connection with the barrio. The barrios in Nowhere are camps. Each time I will say barrio, understand camp. And of course, she connected also with a few workshop providers. Before the event, she was also managing a Facebook group, which is on the bottom left, No Bed, Yes Bed. It's a private group when we share some resources about consent. She was also delivering some pre-event communication, reminding some major guideline. And she was managing the consent question in our post-event census. So she was already doing a brilliant job. However, after each event into 2016, 2017, we had some big increase of complaints on social media. So I had met Aletta in the No Bed, Yes Bed group. I was available and I said, oh, I can help. And we have built together the bigger 2018 project. So if we go before the event, we deliver a barrio guide, which is how we can empower the camp to deal with consent at their level. We make a call for projects and contributors, because most of the workshops which are delivered about consent are not delivered by Aletta and myself. They are delivered by the community. We have created a wiki when we have gathered all that resources that we had since 2020. During the event, we have a special chapter in the program. We have a special chapter in the survival guide. We do a camp tour, a barrio tour, when we remind the main guideline. We deliver some trainings to the nomads, which are the rangers. We deliver trainings to the greeters and to welfare enough. Welfare enough would be a mix between Zendo and Green Dot. So at each beginning of event, we deliver some reminders about consent and how, according to the role those volunteers have, they have to take care of consent. But the major start is the very first day of nowhere, where the Respect Tuesday is happening. So we have done a call for project, and we ask the people to really organize the more they can, whatever they want, workshop, performance, or whatever about consent on the very first day. And it's a success. We have 25 workshops in average. Then in 2080, we decide to go bigger in terms of response. So during the event, there is a reporting box and there is a safe space. So people can just put a paper in the reporting box and say that this happened and that's it. Or with the same form, they can request for an appointment to the safe space to have a specific time to be listened with care. Once the event is over, I was doing some post-event report review. I was also doing some post-event reporter support because sometimes the person was contacting me, so we had a talk together, and I was doing some statistics. That was really great. The project has been a success and has been agreed with the community, but what they were telling us is, okay, everything is happening now, but still, what is going on with the reports? We give you the information and nothing is happening. That's the step we've been till now, and that put us to duplicate what Firefly Collective, I'm sorry with them, I never succeed to tell them their name, but they've done a brilliant job. They've created a consent committee since several years now. I'm French, English is not my language, and I'm a lazy and smart person. So I wrote to them and I said, oh, that's great what you've done. Would you allow me to duplicate and adapt to our context? And of course, they say yes, and just let us know how is it going. So now we have a reviewed code of conduct and a consent committee. I will go to it later. But we were 2 people, but the good news is now we are 11. So there is still Aletta managing with education and prevention, myself dealing with response, but I've got a consent committee co-lead who is Danielle. And you can see 6 other fellows who also applied as consent committee members. The good news is there is no puritanism around. All those people, most of those people are aware or never involved in sex positive, whatever. We are here to help people to have better fun together. For us, banning would be the very last solution. We are really here to help them, to show them the code of conduct and help them to set up how they can do better in the future for themselves, for the reporter, and for the whole community. So if we go to that code of conduct, I won't spend a lot of time to it. You will get the slideshow and you will have more time to read it. But I would like you to have a specific look on the red rectangle because there is an important information, which is the contact given for the ticket purchase can be shared on request with the consent committee in case of a report in which a reportee is identified. That's it. Now, when a participant is buying a ticket, he's ticking a box saying that he agrees with all the terms and conditions, and in the terms of condition, there is a participant of code of conduct informing them that their contact can be used if we have a full report in which their identity is appearing. So I'm playing with a little window, it's not very easy. So our consent committee has a mission to protect our community from unsafe behavior and ensure the community's ability to hold our events years after years. So the role of the consent committee is to define the process for investigation. I mean, update, because we have defined it, suggest changes when needed to the code of conduct, investigate reports in a confidential, thorough, and respectful manner, resolve reports by setting some educative agreements proposed to both parties involved, and make recommendation to the participant wellness meta lead. This is the guy leading the rangers at nowhere, because of course, if one session ends with a ban, the guy managing the gate must know. So the conduct committee priorities are the community safety, confidentiality, education, integrity of nowhere and its values. We are no judge. We are no healers either. We create terms of agreements, both parties, so that each of them know how to contribute to the community safety in the future. So when we have a report when there is enough information, when the reporter has ticked the box saying, yes, I would like a session to be open, then we, the two leads of the consent committee, Daniel and myself, we will allocate a color, and we will nominate some two other consent committee members in charge in case the reporter confirms they want a session to be open. So what about the colors? We made it a little differently to the Firefly. We built a scale with colors related to the nature of the report. So you can see that in the blue box, you have light report, which is about heavy seduction, verbal violence, on-site, online harassment, unwanted presence, inappropriate volunteer management. It's not about sex only. People think about consent mainly about sex and seduction. It's also about volunteer management. And non-consensual pictures or video taken and refusal to delete them. I will talk later of the gray area. Orange, you have that non-consensual contact, but then there is a sexual nature. It's also about organizing, leading an unsafe workshop. And it's not just a sentence. I had 2 workshops being problematic because being unsafe from the start. It's also about unsafe sharing, illegal, or without checking any health vulnerability of the person. We end up with a red, which is of course a pure rape, non-consensual act, and also some sexual touch on someone who is not conscious, being inebriated or sleeping or whatever. This scale has been designed by Sobron. Sobron is a Belgian regional contact, and we have improved it together. So if we go now how a session is going on, once the reporter has confirmed they want a session to be open. So now we have the contact of the reporter, and we contact that person, telling them that they are invited to a consent committee session after problematic behavior, considering that they have the choice to play the game, enjoy the meeting, or if they don't, they take the risk that we decide straight to a ban, which would be, of course, sometime a 1 edition ban or 2 edition ban or definitive ban. So we go in the situation, everybody agreed to have that session. So we'll invite the reporter to talk first. When I say talk, it can be a written way, or the reporter say, you have enough with the report, I don't want to tell more. But we will propose to that person to have a live, so that the consent committee members listen to the story straight from the person impacted. Then we will listen to the reporter. It's a separate live discussion, no mediation or whatever. And we will inform this person, and we'll discuss with that person how they can do better in the future. There is no judge, no therapist. So there is no, is it right or is it wrong? Did it happen or did it not happen? It had an impact. Whatever happened, it had an impact. So what do you propose to reassure the community that you are reliable? So we go to a contract agreement, and of course, each person is has a view on that agreement. And you can see that the reporter has a buddy on the chart. When he is invited to that Skype or live meeting, the reporter is asked if they want to invite a friend they trust, because some part of the contract won't be checked by any nomad. They won't be checked by any consent committee members. They are not in charge during the event. During the event, the contract is checked by the chosen friend of a reporter. Of course, there is a possible appeal if one of the person disagree with the content of the contract. So, okay, we've built the castle, but we have statistics from the past because there is now 2 years that we have a reporting system. And you can see, if you remember for the color, blue is slightly harassment, I would say. Orange is already a kind of sexual contact, and red is about really attempting some sex act or touching someone with sleeping. And so you can see that we had more reports from a year to another, but the proportion are slightly the same. We have about 40% blue, 50% orange, 5 to 10% red. But if I take 2019 as a sample, in those 25 reports, only 12 of them had enough information to identify who had problematic. And of course, when I had a discussion with reporters, I was asking them, if there was a consent committee, would you go for a session? And only 4 told us, yes, I would go for a session. And we end up with 2 red, 1 orange, and 1 blue. So we could say, oh, let's give up the blue, just a mail. We're sending that person a mail, will it be enough? We fully disagree with that. As long as the reporter has asked for a session, it means that person is significant, very difficult to say, highly impacted. So even in a kiss with a tongue or harassment, you never know the past story of the person. So the consent committee will deal also with blue report, and we tend to think that this will be the more important number of reports we deal with. So what can we find in this contract? You will find in any contract some links to some educative documents and a quiz related to these documents. You will find a post-event report to show sample of improvement, how the person identified the same situation and understood they would do differently now. If that person has difficulty to write, this could be a live lecture. Then the very last bullet is the one who is very specific to the report. There will be places, type of activities, or person to avoid. And I come back to the body system. On site, the contract conformity is checked by a friend of their choice, as the consent committee members are not in charge during the events. So now, how can a contract be broken? A contract can be broken with a new report about that same person, coming from the reporting box, coming from the Google form, or never know, coming from the body, who say, my friend didn't really respect the contract. So one consent broken goes to another new session. And of course, it will depend about what was the contract, what was the report, what is a new report. And that can end with a several edition or definitive exclusion grid and proposed to the NOAA directors. So this is it for nowhere. But let me tell you now about Dominic. I purposely chose Dominic, which is okay for a woman, a man, or a person being transgender. So Dominic have been problematic. That person is a serial unsolicited tongue-included kiss provider. This is a real story. I heard about Dominic at Borderland 2017. Borderland is a regional in Denmark. I heard about Dominic at Nowhere 2018. And I heard also about Dominic from someone from their country that grabbed me and tell, have you heard about Dominic? Poker phrase. No. Is there something I should know? Yes, Dominic is problematic in his country, and even worse, when people complain, he puts them to trial. And guess what? Dominic is an active burner, easily offering their help when their competence are relevant. Right now, I'm the only one knowing the full story in Europe. That's the reason why, since 2 years now, I'm lobbying and it's starting. We are building a European consent network. So you can see the profile of the private group who started in April. We are 59 people involved in about 10 to 12 various European burn events, long event, short event. And we are now starting a discussion about that. Because of the personal data protection law, which happens in Europe, which is, we call that the GDPR, we can't share any data. For me, I would have been so happy when a broken contact is broken to at least be able to give a name, a color, and a broken status of contract. This is not possible in Europe. You can't share any personal data. So we are just beginning to think about a very last solution. So right now we are at step 1, which is each event set up its own system, adapted in duration, frequency, and size from the principle 0 proposal. And then we hope to, maybe in 2 years, reach the step 2. And the step 2, we would gather in one single European Consent Committee. We would adopt a same code of conduct with a little chapter with maybe specific to the event. And then we could manage in one single entity in which each event will take a membership. If there is one lawyer very good in GDPR here listening, that person is very welcome. We'll try to dig that, because we tend to think that having a continental consent committee can be the only solution to manage those people who, by definition, are traveling. Here we are.
Thank you. That was awesome. That was really awesome. You know, there was so much great information there. What I think will be lovely about it is that we can see how things are actually happening in another country and how the codes of conduct will be vastly different than some of the things that we deal with here in the United States, particularly when it comes to consent and language. And that's something that we certainly should discuss further, is language, consent, different mixture of different languages. This means this in this culture, this means that in another culture. And it's important that we start to bridge that gap. As a global network, it's vitally important that we come up with systems and parameters that make everyone feel safe. So thank you. I'm curious to see how much larger your European consent group grows. So thank you, KreveTTe. Next up, we have Carly Nix. And Carly is the president of the board of the Firefly Arts Collective. Looking forward to hear all the good things you have to tell us, because you are one of the I guess you could say originators, and we'd love to hear from where you started to where you are now. So take it away, please.
Awesome, thank you so much, Tiya. And I just want to start this out by thanking all of the people from the Firefly Board of Directors and the Conduct Committee who have come before me and made this possible. And let me go ahead and share my screen and then get started. Okay, great. So basically, Firefly started the Code of Conduct and the Conduct Committee 6 years ago. And so we've learned a lot in the last 6 years and have continued to iterate on our process. And so I have a few things that I can share about that today. And for those who don't know about Firefly, it's held on the 4th of July weekend in Vermont. We were established in 2003 with under 200 participants, but we've grown to 1,300 participants per year as of 2019, the last time we had our in-person event. And we have over 5,000 people who have been to Firefly in the past, and about that many people who are active in the community year-round. And so we have both the Firefly community and the Firefly Festival, and so those are kind of used interchangeably throughout this presentation. And the Code of Conduct was first established in 2015 and adapted again in 2019. And the Conduct Committee was also established in 2015. And Conduct Committee, as well as the Firefly Board of Directors, are both year-round volunteer corps. So people who volunteer, 10 to 15 hours a month, typically on Firefly activities. And one also thing to note about conduct committees is that there's some Firefly camps that have their own additional internal conduct committees in addition to the Firefly Conduct Committee. And just to do a little orientation here, this is the Firefly burn field in the hills of Vermont. It's very beautiful, and I hope that everyone can make it there sometime. We have a bug instead of an effigy. So this is the last bug that we had at Firefly in 2019. And we also have a lot of disco parties in the woods, and it's quite gorgeous. So just needed to rep us a little bit there. And then in terms of traditions and behavior, so we've been talking about code of conduct and consent, and we have lots of different places where these kinds of things show up on our website. So when people try to learn about us or sign up for a ticket, there's lots of places where these traditions and behaviors and code of conduct show up when you're trying to become a Firefly participant. And basically from the high level, what I think is that participants need to know what behavior is going to get them kicked off the island so that they can avoid doing that, but also to know like what kind of behaviors to be looking out for that would mean getting kicked off the island. And so and to that end, what do we need to do to keep our friends safe, fellow burners safe, even strangers who you don't know at the event if you see something happening? And also what kind of resources does the event have to support people experiencing crisis or harassment or rape? And what are our collective responsibilities to speak up and intervene if we see something that may be harmful? And the goals of the Code of Conduct are more of an orientation for how to navigate Firefly experiences rather than like a list of commandments from on high. And it's about how do we understand and respect cultural assumptions in a space where people have lots of different values that are different from each other and different ways of seeing the world, different ways of processing things intellectually and so forth. And so it's sort of like a common language of behavioral expectations and delineates some boundaries that may not be quite as visible if you don't articulate them. And so the first version of the Code of Conduct was launched in 2015, and the second version was adapted in October 2019. And I like to say that there's basically like the short version of the first one would be, we strongly suggest that you not hurt people. And the second one is basically that you're responsible for your actions and their consequences. And so we went further than the original Code of Conduct when we adapted it. And so the first code said that at all events organized by Firefly, participants are responsible for their own behavior and resolving their own issues. So that means that it's indicating that we're not going to help you if something bad happens because of radical self-reliance. And so that was one of the things that was like one of the big cruxes that we had to fix from the first version. And then also Firefly Arts Collective strongly suggests behaving in a manner that does not make other participants feel unsafe or threatened. This kind of is gaslighting because it doesn't fully recognize that people can be harmed in this kind of environment and that we're trying to prevent that specifically. And so if we can prevent bad things from happening from the beginning, then we don't have to have a lot of effort that goes in later to fix problems that occur. And Firefly Arts Collective will not condone behavior that endangers its ability to hold the annual festival and other community events. This is good because we're talking about protecting the event itself, because everyone at Firefly ostensibly wants to come back to Firefly if they're passionate about it. But this also is only a small piece of why it matters to have a code of conduct. And so the second version of the code of conduct is a bit longer. And so we talk about being guided by the 10 principles of Burning Man and regional events. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we see the 10 principles being intertwined in various ways when it comes to code of conduct and consent. And all Firefly participants expected to take personal responsibility for their actions and the effects of those actions on others. And so this is kind of like, you have to really reckon with this thing that you're going to do. Is it going to harm someone else or not? And think about what other people's boundaries are and what you need to do to facilitate asking for things or giving clear understanding upfront about what an experience may entail and things like that. And taking people's boundaries and hearing no, essentially. And Firefly Arts Collective will respond to any participant behavior that directly endangers its participants or its ability to hold annual festival and other community events. So we came out and directly said that we will respond to, if you hurt someone, we will do something about it. And we expect that participants will endeavor as they are able to resolve their own issues and conflicts and not to rely on FAC leadership to address all the problems and conflicts. So with this one, we understand that there is an amount of community intervention that needs to happen on the micro community level of individual camps and people within the camps and friend groups working together to resolve conflicts. And this, comes, I think, is in alignment with the 10 principles. And participants accept that volunteer resources are limited and that the Firefly community contains diverse values and goals. And so basically something you individual Firefly participants may not, may be offended by things that people would do or that would want to do in various spaces, but that essentially giving each other the space to be able to do those things separately and not be entangled in like radical self-expression being like the one and only value that we care about. And Firefly Arts Collective leadership commits itself to taking the needs of its community and Firefly participants seriously, to handle reports of issues responsibly, equitably, and in a timely manner, and to making its best effort to resolve matters consistent with their organizational values and community standards. And so with this, we're committing as the leadership body to listening to people, believing people when they report being harmed by people in the community, or if, listening with reasonable, giving an ear to any concerns and investigating if something is actually going on that needs to be addressed. And that we make our best effort to resolve matters with our organizational values and community standards. So we try to work with the community to get a consensus understanding of what are our values and what kind of spaces are we trying to create where people feel safe and can explore the things that they wanted to do at our burn. And Firefly Arts Collective welcomes a stranger, and we share an expectation that all participants will work to create a space that is welcoming for everyone. And so with this, we are thinking about basically not discriminating against people based on where they come from or who they are, and making sure that Firefly is a place that people can feel safe to show up. And so thinking about the 10 principles in harmony, so in the past, when I have talked about consent with people, even 5-6 years ago, people talk about, oh, well, consent is already baked into some of the principles. Do we really need another rule? Like, let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be. And in some ways, yeah, we could bake it into the rules or into the 10 principles and see how they're all related. But in terms of code of conduct, so a lot of what I heard when I first joined the burner community was about radical self-expression and how you can't, don't tell me what to do, or this is who I am, or this is how I'm going to express myself. Or like, well, that's just how that person is. So let's figure out how to create, safety checks so that even though we know this person is a rapist, we'll allow them to still come to the event. And so we're, I guess, moving away from that as a community and more thinking about how these different things relate and connect to each other. So yes, radical inclusion, but also civic responsibility. Yes, radical self-reliance, but also communal effort and participation and these kinds of things. So gifting and leave no trace, there's all these different ways that they connect to create something that is balanced. And so we welcome and respect the stranger, which is radical inclusion, once you're a part of our community, your actions have consequences, civic responsibility. If your behavior is found to be harmful to others at the event, leave no trace. We'll take appropriate action to protect the community and the event, communal effort, participation, and civic responsibility. And so leaving no trace it's beyond picking up trash. It's ensuring that your gift is wanted before it is gifted, because one thing that you think is a treasure might be trash to someone else. Leaving people better off than how you found them, sort of like campsite rules, but applying it to burns in a leave no trace kind of context. And also not scarring other people in terms of their hearts, minds, and bodies, or giving people PTSD just because you want to do something. And the Conduct Committee, so the Conduct Committee has responsibilities that are separate from the board and operates independently of the board. And so they will investigate any reports of intimidation, stalking, verbal or physical abuse, violence, non-consensual physical contact, including but not limited to unwelcome sexual contact interaction. Also harassment, including harassment based on perceived or actual identity, non-consensual intoxication, abuse of power or discrimination in a Firefly leadership position or volunteer role, and any uncertain situation where the Conduct Committee can identify the people in Firefly best situated to address the situation. And the board is more responsible for looking into abuse or neglect of Firefly or venue property, physical or otherwise, like vandalism, theft, or destruction, abuse of the ticketing process, or impersonating an event organizer or leader, disrespecting the community surrounding where an event is held, such as dumping trash in local dumpsters, trespassing, harassment, or violations of the event's sound policies, because we need to maintain good relations with our neighbors. Also wanton, flagrant, or repeated disregard for one's own safety or well-being, or the well-being of others in a matter that compels urgent intervention by other participants, community members, volunteers, or outside agencies, such as intervention by local law enforcement or fire department staff, and repeated or egregious violations of any and all policies put in effect by event organizers. So we see these as, this is sort of the line that the board holds at the event, and we have 2 board on-call people per day per the event. So for 24 hours, we have 2 sober board people who are on call to sort of hold this line. And within the Firefly Conduct Committee, the goal is really to protect the community from abusive, intimidating, threatening, or unsafe behavior, and ensure the board's ability to hold the event. And everyone who joins the Conduct Committee has received special training from the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, has been vetted by the board of directors and also the Firefly community, and signed a confidentiality agreement in order to receive and investigate reports of misconduct at Firefly and to interview people on behalf of this process. And the Conduct Committee works in tandem with the safety corps at Firefly during the festival, as well as with the board of directors, and the Conduct Committee and the board of directors work year round to keep the community safe. And so the Conduct Committee has an Airtable reporting process where you can report different kinds of misconduct, and you can report things anonymously. You can ask specifically for the whether or not you want the information to be investigated. Sometimes people submit just like FYI kind of information that they want to make sure that there is a record of hearing a rumor or even a firsthand report of something having happened. And so we have this database of reports that people have contributed to. And then after reports are received, they're investigated. And after the investigation, the Conduct Committee makes a recommendation to the board of directors, and the board has taken the recommendation 92% of the time. So the Conduct Committee's job is really to investigate reports and to make that recommendation. But it is the board itself that makes decisions on ticketing and banning of members of Firefly. And the goals of a Conduct Committee investigation are not to determine guilt or innocence, but rather to develop enough of an understanding of a situation that a recommendation can be made to the board. And it's really about thinking about what is the kind of risk that we're talking about, and is there a pattern, and these kinds of things to figure out if there's a risk of something bad happening to people or the event in the future. And the warning and ban policy is listed on our website, so you can go there and read more after this. But officially issue warnings, and when are people unbanned? How can they get unbanned? What is the process for that? So we put together a pretty rigorous and specific process for dealing with different types of appeals and situations that come up. And when in doubt, we refer to our process, and then we refine the process and make it better as we go. And in terms of recommendations that have been made from the first few years of the Conduct Committee's existence, there's been, some amount of no action required or archived issues that have been brought up. There have been official warning letters. Some have been referred to the board, and then also one-year bans and indefinite bans. And sometimes people are banned from volunteering in particular capacities due to something that occurred. So yeah, there's like different types of recommendations that can be made based on the findings of the investigation. And basically how we decide recommendations and also which reports to investigate depends on, based on the information that's been given, what is the severity of the impact of the report or future potential future reports that would be made about on this topic, and also the likelihood that a situation would recur or a behavior would recur. And so by evaluating this like harm matrix, the Conduct Committee decides where to invest its time and energy to best serve the community. And there's different types of issues that have been reported by Fireflies about physical endangerment, sexual misconduct, intimidating or threatening behavior, non-consensual intoxication, history of prior misconduct, misuse of position of authority, predatory behavior, misuse or disregard of event property, and trespassing. So these are some of the types of issues that are received and that the Conduct Committee deals with. And so at the time that this presentation was created, that was 81% of investigations were resolved. And we measure how well we're doing in the community culture by doing surveys every year after our festival, and work with folks who are knowledgeable in statistics, who in our Survey Corps, who help put this together. And so we ask people questions about, is it comfortable, is it safe, is it well managed or crowded at Firefly? And then we compare those results over time. And the first year that the Conduct Committee was created, it was a 70% positive response about what the Conduct Committee had done so far. And so people were thankful and happy that it existed and that it had been created to solve this purpose. Some more here on the Firefly survey. So in 2018, there were 420 respondents, about 25% of the event. And that's basically how we get a pulse on what's happening within the community. And yeah, so basically 110 people that year believe that the leadership should promote consent culture and the Conduct Committee more proactively. 13 thought that it should be less active, and 260 thought it was the right amount. So that was a pretty good spread of like where people think we should be and where we are. And some of the challenges of the Conduct Committee process at this point, and basically the growth of consent culture at Firefly, confidentiality is really difficult because there are a lot of people in the community who are friends with different parties to conflicts, and also with different people in leadership. And so maintaining confidentiality, and especially in light of misunderstandings about what's happening, can be very difficult at times. And so communities really need to have respect for and trust in the process in order for this to work. And there's a nuance there to the communication aspect from the leadership, but also the Conduct Committee and the community itself, in terms of having dialogue about the Conduct Committee process, what it does, what it doesn't do, and the other ways that people can volunteer and collaborate to create happy. And the ramp up to being a member can be long, and because of the type of work that it is. And so we're actually in the process right now of trying to recruit more volunteers for the Firefly Conduct Committee. And basically the communication, as I mentioned. Other challenges, different people have different experiences of reality. And so basically the conduct committee process involves a lot of interviewing to try to get to an understanding of what the consensus description of reality of a situation would be. People have difficulty accepting and reckoning with the potential fact of one of their friends having harmed someone else. And so how do we support people in community to grow in that way? Lack of training on what sexual assault and abusive relationships actually look like versus people's inherent intuition or an average person's logical analysis of a situation. People have difficulty aligning about what's happening due to confidentiality. The community members assume that since someone posted about an incident on Facebook, therefore the Firefly Conduct Committee must know about it and will take appropriate action, when sometimes we don't know about things that it seems like everyone else knows. And so we have to figure out how to get people to submit reports and trust the process and give us that information so that we don't have missing stair situations. And community members sometimes also assume that because the conduct committee exists, therefore there's no unsafe or harmful behavior that can happen at Firefly, and that box has just been checked. And that's just not how it works. Like, we all have to create those spaces together. And so the Firefly Conduct Committee is currently a group of 5 people, and the Firefly community is 5,000. So I like to think of it as an analogy of a liver. And so if Firefly is a body, 5 people can't be the liver for 5,000 people. It's just doesn't work. So again, it's something that we all have to work towards together. And in terms of like what the conduct committee actually does, like, it's not a CSI thing. So there's you know, a lot of misunderstanding about what it does and who does what and how things work. And so we're working to try to help solve that problem. And we do have a list of indefinitely banned individuals on our website. Sometimes this is confused, or people think that this is our only list of indefinitely banned individuals. That's not the case. This is a list of people who we felt were so dangerous to others that we needed to let that be known on our website. And so in terms of reducing the number of missing stairs, we think about how can we facilitate more people coming forward and sharing their experiences or information or rumors that they've heard. How do we make it easier and safer for participants to report harmful behavior? And so general advice that I would have for people thinking about creating a conduct committee or a code of conduct: perfect is the enemy of good. I think it's better to create something and iterate on it and know that you're not always going to get things perfect. Sometimes people are going to be angry and vocal, but I think that's part of the growing pains of the community. And we've had experiences of people feeling upset about change in the past in our community, but we also know from our survey feedback that the majority of Firefly participants are happy with the direction that things are going. And so it's helpful to have those different ways of getting feedback so that you know what people actually want within the community rather than just what a few people want. And surveys are a great way to understand that. And then considering basically what kind of community are you cultivating? What kind of experiences are you trying to cultivate? Like, are you trying to grow a place that just invites anyone regardless of reckless behavior? Because if you do that, then it's you're going to attract more of that behavior. And then also, if you can't have a policy of like, well, I saw someone at a party last week and they didn't assault or harass me, so therefore they seem fine. That's a policy that protects and prioritizes bad actors over the most vulnerable people in the community. And listening to people is really important. Shared responsibility for creating safer spaces. Again, it's everyone's responsibility. The conduct committee is only a part of the larger puzzle. And so in terms of communal effort, both event organizers and participants work on this. And so creating safer spaces as containers for participatory art is, we have to think about how do we create spaces that are baseline safe in body, mind, and soul, and protect the spaces and ecosystems and plants and animals that call our temporary cities home. And we think about that from a cultural development side of things. So in terms of programming, have workshops the greeters are trained on these kinds of things. We have participant-driven events that are held, as well as org-driven events, signage and art around consent, policies and guidelines. And in terms of things that are in process, we're working on consent guidelines that are more descriptive of how to think about these kinds of things rather than like do X, Y, Z. And we're working on a conflict of interest policy for leaders and developing restorative justice kind of programs that's like bubbling up within the community now. And we're also working on an experiences of racism survey for Firefly participants. And I just wanted to say thanks again to all the Fireflies whose past and future contributions are ever growing a culture where we can all be safe, healthy, and welcome, and where we can learn, grow, and burn together. And so the Conduct Committee, the Board of Directors, FESCOM and planning committees, Mary Heron from the Touchstone Project, the Conscious Touch Facilitator and Communication and Consent Workshop Facilitator, and all the Fireflies who've attended these workshops to learn, grow, and contribute to improving the culture. The Boston BED and Boston Burner Consent Facebook groups, and the 11th Principle of Consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carly. Wow, such great information. And it's wonderful to see how your organic growth happened in order to be able to really create a great code of conduct and a set of systems that everybody can learn from. So thank you again. That was awesome. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us again today, but there's one thing I'd like you to also remember, which is we are not the police. What are we? We're excited, engaged, regional contacts, and community leaders who want to see our communities thrive. And hopefully through the codes of conduct that you've heard about today, and also if you have an opportunity, please check out the Codes of Conduct database and come up with ideas for a way to develop organic codes of conduct and consent committees for your communities so that they will thrive and continue to sustain burner culture from this point on. Thank you, everyone.
Cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred. Cook it with emotion. You gotta cook it, treat it like it's sacred. Gonna make some music together. Beautifuls, it is fantastic to see you again.